Well, what an opportunity we have when Dr. Joel Klein is in the studio with us today, and I want to encourage you that if you want to join the conversation, give us a call. The phone number is 776-5368. He's a physician that is with Ventana Wellness, and we're going to talk about a subject that I know that he is very passionate about, and that is cholesterol. And there's so many questions that come out of this because it's being treated in such a variety of ways, and I know that you're very concerned about the treatment.
Right.
But what is cholesterol?
Well, cholesterol is a naturally occurring substance. In fact, we couldn't live without it. That's one of the points in my presentation, is that it's essential for life. It's actually the most abundant compound in your brain. All your stress and sex hormones are made from cholesterol. Vitamin D is made from cholesterol. It's actually anti-inflammatory to some degree and anti-infective. It helps fight infections. So it's a vital compound, and it's been made into kind of a boogeyman over the past 60 years, coming originally from data that came out of the big Framingham study, where they studied Framingham, Massachusetts for 30 years and put the whole town under a microscope from the Harvard School of Public Health. Right. And they noticed that there was an association, which does not equal causation, between elevated cholesterol and people with heart disease, and it has gone on ever since. And when people who've really skeptically looked at all the assumptions that we're making about it really look into detail, it turns out that what we're being told is really quite a stretch from what the data and studies actually show.
All right. So it is the plaque of the arteries, right?
Actually, no.
Okay, well, you're the doc. Straighten me out.
When they analyze the plaque in the arteries, most of the fat in there are adulterated or oxidized or rusted fats, particularly like the omega-6s that we find in corn oil and some of these other things. These plaques are not made for, they have some cholesterol in them, and there is a formation of them by the supposed bad cholesterol, LDL, but it's not really bad. There's only one subtype of LDL that's bad. It's a little complicated, but as we've talked about before, that subtype of cholesterol predominates in people who have insulin resistance, pre-diabetes. But otherwise, that bad cholesterol is not bad. There's different types, and it's complicated. I go into this in the talk that I give. But it turns out that cholesterol is not bad. It is body armor, and actually, if you really look at it, cholesterol itself does not cause heart disease, except in mostly this one exceptional case.
All right. That was my next question. So, by the way, let me just encourage you to jot this date down, November 15th at 7 o'clock. Dr. Joel Klein will be doing this free seminar at the Smullen Center right across from our VMC. Let me encourage you to go to this. I mean, this is a wealth of information. He's very passionate about this, and it is a free seminar. That'll be November 15th at 7 o'clock at the Smullen Center. All right, so it doesn't have the connection to heart disease that we thought, but it certainly is being treated as such.
Absolutely. And I think the problem is that things have been, as in many things in medicine, condensed down and oversimplified to make it easy for doctors to look at a lab test, give a prescription, and move on to the next patient. Most of the people looking at this are looking at public health kind of information, where they're looking at and saying, well, if we give this to everybody in this category, we'll do more we'll have more benefit than we're doing harm. And that's not necessarily the case. And it takes a long time. My original cholesterol presentation was an hour and a half. And I gave people so much information because I felt like I had to justify what I was saying, because it's the exact opposite of what everybody's hearing. People would leave with their heads spinning. They didn't know what to make of all of it. So I really had to condense it down to some very basic points. But the bottom line, and we can get into this, and I can talk about a number of sources, is that treating high cholesterol, particularly with most of the data we have with statin drugs, in people who do not have heart disease, again, that's the key thing. They have not been diagnosed with heart disease.
And so they're taking a statin drug just for
high cholesterol.
All right.
There is very little data that it actually does very much at all. And in fact, there's no data for women and people over 65. And there is some suggestion it actually may do some harm in a number of ways. But there's very little, next to no data saying that it significantly makes a difference.
All right, and the side effects of statin drugs now is becoming quite alarming.
We're learning more and more, and this was one of the things that came out in the report from a medical organization called the Cochrane Collaboration, which is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to promote the practice of evidence-based medicine. And they did a study of this that they published a little more than a year and a half ago, saying that, and they looked at all these prevention studies in people without heart disease. And they said, well, there seems to be some benefit, but we think that the adverse effects are being underreported, and actually recommend that they be used with caution. Not given out to everybody who walks into the office with high cholesterol, but used with caution. We're seeing now, and this has been known, certainly people know about the muscular side effects. In fact, I had a gentleman in my office yesterday whose left leg basically took him 3 years to recover from the damage that a statin drug did to his left leg muscularly.
All right. Now, I had a gentleman, I can't remember his name now, but several years ago when negative reports were coming out about statin drugs, and he was formerly an airline pilot, and he had come through the various global amnesia issues that sometimes are associated with statin drugs.
Yes.
And he just went ballistic, saying, we got too many pilots flying with this.
I can imagine.
And so he was trying to get the FAA to look at this because it's just kind of loosely being prescribed. There's no big deal.
Right. And again, as I mentioned before, cholesterol is the most abundant compound in your brain. So if we're artificially lowering your body's production, we can be causing all kinds of issues there. In fact, the studies that were done, they looked at, there was some benefit in decreasing heart attacks, but there was an equal and opposite increase in death from all other causes, including cancer, homicide, suicide, and accidents. So we look at, is that a coincidence, or are people's brains not functioning properly? And as I told you, there was a NASA astronaut, Dwayne Gravelin, who goes around the country lecturing this. He's a doctor, and he was twice put on Lipitor, and within 6 months had an episode of total global amnesia.
Well, that's the guy I had on.
It was Dr. Gravelin?
It was him.
That's him,
you
yes.
Just used
exactly. Well, he was a
myself.
NASA astronaut, not just an airline pilot.
Right.
And when it first happened, everybody said, we don't know of anything like this. We don't know that statins do anything.
Yeah.
When the second episode occurred, he did research. He submitted a Freedom of Information Act inquiry to the FDA, got Pfizer's original data that was submitted for approval of Lipitor, and found of the 2,200 patients studied, there were 11 episodes of total global amnesia or severe memory impairment, which only adds up to 0.5%. And the key number of the FDA is 1%. But the problem is what they do is they break out side effects in the same organ system, so they will list memory impairment different from confusion, different from anxiety, different from all these other brain symptoms, so that none of them individually are 1%, but when you add them up, it comes up to a much larger number.
Okay, Dr. Klein, by the way, let me say to our listeners, if you want to join us, the phone number is 7765368. You're welcome to do it. I'm hearing you say then you want to separate the treatment of high cholesterol from heart disease.
Yes.
They have to be treated differently.
Yes.
Okay, so what is the primary cause of heart disease if it's not cholesterol?
And as an old physiology professor of mine would say, if I knew the answer to that, I would be shaking hands with King Gustav. There are theories about that. Obviously, one of the biggest ones is the low level of inflammation that is actually causing the initial injury to the wall of the coronary arteries that then allows these smaller LDL particles, when they predominate in people like with prediabetes, to infiltrate. But there's damage to the vessel wall that starts this healing process. It's actually the body trying to heal the damage from the inflammation that then becomes accelerated. There's also a Dr. Kilmer McCulley who found in 1969 at Harvard that there is a compound called homocysteine that builds up in the blood when people are not getting enough folate in their diet to match their genetic type. And it's a little bit of a complicated story, but these high levels of homocysteine have independently been shown to be related to heart disease. And they have a theory of how the homocysteine, inflammation, viral infections, and those things actually contribute to causing the initial lesion of heart disease that then the cholesterol is swept up into as a bystander.
So is sugar and bad fat the cause? Does that lean towards the cholesterol problem and the heart problem?
To some degree. What are we calling bad fat? See, this is the one thing I want to get at. So,
French fries.
yes, well, that's sugar and bad fat.
Yeah, right.
Because it's oxidized. Yes, so there's evidence again that these trans fats, the ones that form when we hydrogenate or oxidize vegetable oils, are a problem and raise cholesterol. And I learned this back in 1976 in biochemistry when they told us how these molecules can stack up on one another, whereas the natural occurring forms will repel each other. The one point I do want to make is that the whole notion that eating saturated fat causes heart disease is a complete fabrication.
Whoa.
It does not cause it. One of the Framingham researchers wrote a book in the late 90s, and he said the diet heart hypothesis, meaning that dietary fat causes heart disease, is the biggest health scam of the century. But for reasons of pride, prejudice, and politics, continues to live on. If we look at it, as far as we can tell, and this is not record keeping alone, heart disease and cancer were rare before 1900. Coronary thrombosis was first described in the medical literature in 1929. Well, what fat did people use for cooking before 1900? Lard.
Yeah.
Saturated fat.
Right.
Yeah. This is a complete fabrication. Eating cholesterol does not raise your cholesterol, does not cause heart disease. So the whole thing that eggs are bad for you is again another myth.
November 15th at 7 o'clock, Dr. Klein will be giving this seminar. It's free. And it's going to be at the Smullen Center there, which is in the parking lot of RVMC. Mark that down. What an opportunity for you to go and hear all of this firsthand. Dr. Klein, let me take a phone call and then we'll come back. And hi, B, thanks for waiting. What's your thoughts today?
Yes, what's the long-term effects on pravastatin?
So pravastatin, anything that ends in statin, pravastatin, the original brand name was Pravachol. This is the big question. In different people, it's going to show up in different ways. So we know that there are the problems with muscle. That's the more severe types of problems that the drug needs to be stopped for. And liver issues that your doctor is checking for. But again, what we're looking for is that there may be increased incidence of depression and dementia. Again, because it's affecting the brain. Again, there are some suggestions in people over 65 who were treated with Pravachol for 5 years, who are actually a high-risk group of patients. At the end of the 5 years, there was a 4% decrease in heart attacks and a 25% increase in cancer in the treatment group. Now, that it was including skin cancers, so you can make an argument, but there still is an unanswered question is that whether long-term use of these drugs, because they haven't studied them for 25 years, will actually increase risk of cancer in some cases.
Oh, does that apply to like memory losses, to short-term memory loss?
Absolutely. This is what we were talking about before. Memory issues can certainly be a potential problem, and if there's a question of that, if you do not have heart disease, even if you are, the quality of life becomes an issue, needs to be discussed with your doctor. You should look at discontinuing the drug. Everybody on a statin should be taking a supplement of CoQ10, which your body uses for energy, and the statin drugs inhibit the production of that as well. And after 3-6 months off the drug, if the memory and mental functioning improves, you got your answer that the drug was causing the problem.
There you go. Thanks, B.
Okay. Oh, I have a question. What is the name of that drug again? The supplement you said?
Oh, CoQ10, or called coenzyme Q10, but usually you'll find it on the shelves as CO, big letter Q, number 10.
Okay.
Every health food store, vitamin shop, everybody has it. It's very commonly used.
Okay, one more question. I'm sorry. What if you just stop taking it, or do you need to take it off slowly?
All depends on how high of a dose you're on. It should only be done under the direction of a doctor. I wouldn't just stop it on your own. If your doctor won't do it, maybe you need to talk to somebody who's willing to work with you on it, but I wouldn't do it without medical supervision.
Oh, well, that's what I did.
Okay. Well, I can't advise you of that. Okay. You're a free, sentient human being. This is a free country.
Go for it.
You're allowed to do anything. You're allowed to take care of your own body the way you choose.
We're still free, and we still live in America.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. Thank you, B.
Thank you.
Again,
Bye-bye.
the phone number is 776-5368 if you want to join the conversation today. All right. Now, we've heard that processed foods, sugar, the unhealthy fats are obviously contribute to all these other issues. So what's the ideal diet to maintain cholesterol and a good heart?
It depends, because that's the thing. There is not one diet that serves everyone.
No, I realize that.
Right. So for some people, quite frankly, of European ancestry, we find that people with inflammatory problems do better on what they call the caveman diet, which is no grains or very little grains and protein, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. Whole grains and I really think that, again, I don't know what we're getting in this country, but even flour products, even whole grain bread is still a flour product. Flour has been partially digested by the milling process, so it more easily turns into sugar in our body. So I'm thinking really whole cooked grains, you know, what we used to, you know, eat, you know, 100 years ago. Non-starchy vegetables, so not a lot of potatoes, carrots, corn, and peas. Sure, you can eat them, but they shouldn't be the predominant part of your diet. Healthy fats, in which, again, in pre-diabetes, diabetes, these inflammation issues, olive oil, even though it's not an essential fat like the omega-3s and 6s that we talk about, is medicinal, particularly for diabetics. That people, as long as they were doing enough olives, olive oil, and avocados, they didn't need their drugs.
Wow. Wow. All right. So as if you were treating somebody today for high cholesterol, what would you be doing for them?
Well, number one, I wouldn't necessarily treat them. I'm not convinced that high cholesterol is a medical problem.
Okay.
That's the whole point. What is it really causing? What are we doing? Now, it can be a sign of your body trying to protect itself. So an unhealthy diet without the right fats, the body will make more cholesterol to help shore up the cell membrane so that they work properly. An untreated thyroid problem will cause high cholesterol. Unfortunately, a lot of drugs, including some of the ones that are used for blood pressure, including the diuretics and the beta blockers, can elevate cholesterol. So I see somebody with a high cholesterol, I'm not looking at treating the number. That would be, to me, that's like punching out the oil light on your dashboard. I want to find out why the light bulb's on and see if I can do something about that rather than just treat the indicator.
We were talking briefly during the break, the rise of cancer, and you're showing some connection here of all of this you're talking about, and even the probability now that some of these drugs may enhance cancer.
Well, that's the thing. Again, the statin drugs, I think there is still an open question because in a number of different studies, there's always this little hint in the background that there may be an increase in cancer in the treatment group. We don't know for sure that they cause it. Certainly, again, our high processed food diets promoting inflammation are likely a significant cause of cancer, and environmental toxins. I mean, in 1900, the top 3 causes of death in the United States were diarrheal illness, because we didn't have public sewage, pneumonia, and tuberculosis in 1900. By 1940, it was heart disease, stroke, and cancer in 40 years. What happened during those 40 years? Number one, we started all using hydrogenated vegetable oil and processed fats, because they were processed because then they would stay on the shelves longer and not go rancid. The property of those fats that allows them to go rancid is the same thing that actually helps them in your body, because it has to do with their ability to oxygen. So as soon as we started treating them so they wouldn't go bad on the shelf, we inhibited their good action in our body. And then, of course, we look at the whole issue of environmental, industrial chemicals, toxins. How much of an issue was that playing in those 40 years?
And 40 years now, later.
Same thing. We're no different than they were in 1940.
But we got a higher cancer rate.
Well, but it's still a little bit, it's not quite tied, or I forget where the stats are. It's close to heart disease, but it's still maybe a little bit behind or close to it. So we still have heart disease, cancer, stroke, the same top 3 causes of death that we had 70 years ago.
Are we blaming too much on, well, my dad had it, therefore I got it?
Yes. What we all know, the problem is, family history is important, but what we know from the study of epigenetics, which is actually how our genes are turned on and off, that we've learned of, genes are turned on and off all the time. Just you inherit a tendency. Whether that tendency gets expressed, what we're learning has to do with environmental factors, much of which is nutrition. It has now become convenient to say, well, it's in your family, God gave you bad genes, so the only thing you can do about bad genes is take a drug. And that, again, is a false premise.
Okay. Sugar. Is it getting a bad rap?
You know, everything has to be taken with a grain of salt, as we have said.
Oh, salt and pepper.
Salt is not bad either. Only 30% of people with high blood pressure have salt-sensitive high blood pressure, and you can actually do a blood test to tell which ones those are.
Really?
So only a third of them are. So that's being maybe overplayed. Sugar, well, if the average intake of an American per year is 160 pounds of sugar, maybe we aren't making too much of it. But there are many people who can get away with it. There are just a lot of people who can't. And that depends maybe on these individual genetic tendencies, and we're also learning how changes in the gut with gut bacteria from antibiotics and the diets and all that can actually predispose also to diabetes and inflammation.
Wow.
So some people can do it, some can't, and it really needs to be dealt with on an individual basis.
I asked you, how do you negate the appetite or the addiction to sugar?
You stop eating it and you start eating healthy food. I get patients on healthy fats,
such as
olive oil. In particular, really reducing the carbohydrates, and mostly these healthy oils, coconut oil for cooking, but olive oil is the main one, actually. And Dr. Mark Houston will put his patients on 4 tablespoons of olive oil a day, somehow worked into their diet with this. And you get them away from it, you help the gut. This is more naturopathically, digest food better, because a lot of the craving is you're not digesting protein and fat well because the gut is disturbed, so we have to keep stoking the fire with the kindling of the carbs because you're not putting the logs on that are like the protein and fat. So getting on the good diet, there's some supplements that can help, and other cinnamon, some of these other spices that help with it. And then when I treat the gut for imbalances that we think are there, people's craving for sugar naturally, decreases. They don't want it anymore.
Irritable bowel syndrome, is that a sugar issue?
Partially. Irritable bowel syndrome is a kind of umbrella term for all these disturbances in the gut. And I tell people, when it ends in syndrome, syndrome is a Greek word meaning occurring together.
Yeah.
So it means we really don't know what's going on, but we see these things occurring together frequently, so now we call it a thing like it's a real thing.
Yeah.
My experience is I treat people with IBS, and I get people better all the time by getting them off the sugar. Allergenic foods, gluten, number one. Dairy sometimes, corn and soy, are causing bowel irritability, disturbance of the gut bacteria from past antibiotic use. So using probiotics and these things cures a lot of irritable bowel syndrome.
All right, the gluten-free thing is really huge. I mean, now I'm seeing menus in high-end restaurants saying KF.
Right. Gluten is not bad by itself, but so many people, it turns out, are reactive to it. The medical teaching was 1 in 3 to 5,000 people had celiac disease. Researchers at my medical school published an article in Scientific American 3 years ago, and number one, showing the mechanism of how gluten can cause all these inflammatory and autoimmune diseases that alternative doctors have been proposing this for decades. But they also tested 13,000 healthy people with the blood test for celiac disease. They found it in 1 in 133. 30 to 50 times more common than had been previously believed.
Absolutely.
So it is an absolute issue.
Dr. Joel Klein, and he is now on staff at Ventana Wellness. You can call there if you'd like to schedule an appointment with him, but do schedule on your calendar November 15th at 7 o'clock at the Smullen Center. That's in the parking lot there at RVMC. It's going to be a free seminar on everything we just talked about today, and I think you'll find it to be extremely informative.
Much more detail.
Much more detail. Thank you, Dr. Klein.
Great,
I love
you,
your passion. God bless you, pal.
Thank
We'll
you.
be right back.